Welcome to the Awakened Parent Project, Conscious Conversations, Empowered Parenting, with me, Susan Dolci. It's time to open our hearts and our minds to what it means to be a parent, exploring and expanding the ways we communicate, validate, and show up daily for our kids. With a parent-centric focus, you learn to become more present, a better active listener, more reflective, more engaged, and mutually empowered. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence, honesty, self-compassion, unconditional love, and conscious communication. The Awakened Parent Project starts now. Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to the Awakened Parent Project. I'm your host, Susan Dolci, and I've wanted to have a podcast about conscious parenting for a long time now. A place where we can have conscious conversations that empower parents and their children. The goal of the show is to help parents become more compassionate and engaged as we share the many techniques and ideologies of the conscious parenting community. I'm a life coach and a student with the Jai Institute for Parenting, and it's my hope that you'll find this a safe space to journey on a path of both practical and spiritual exploration. From the time my first daughter was born in 1994, yes, that's a long time ago, I've been driven by a vision where children are both nurtured physically and spiritually by adults who are present, grounded, and empowered. I believe that conscious communication, self-exploration, and self-forgiveness are the tools that enable parents to foster deep, lasting connections with their children. And my guest today has a lot of experience in this arena. Danielle Faris has worked in the field with children for the last 17 years. Her training background includes early childhood development, holistic health and education, the Waldorf philosophy, and the RIE approach. And she's also a current student with the Jai Institute for Parenting. She's my buddy. Danielle helps families in her coaching practice. Her website's called Raised Courageous, to integrate mindful practices, moving away from fear-based parenting techniques for a more harmonious and balanced home life by strengthening the parent-child relationship. Welcome to the show, Danielle. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so fear-based parenting. We're going to talk about this today. There's a lot to talk about because, first of all, those two words shouldn't be in the same sentence together, right? Yeah. And also being a product of the 60s and 70s, I kind of, I think I was mostly fear-based parenting, at least from my dad's side. So let's talk about that. Like let's kind of put some context around what fear-based parenting is.
Yeah, great. That's a great way to get started. So if you find yourself identifying as someone who uses fear-based parenting, like you just mentioned, it most likely didn't start with you, right? So fear-based parenting tactics are most often instinctual reactions to our child when we are triggered, or our best attempt to gain control and gain power over our child in a situation by means of controlling them. And, given your present level of knowledge around this topic at the time, if you're parenting based on instinct, you're likely going to jump into one of those fear-based parenting tactics. It's been used for generations upon generations of people across a wide span of cultures, countries, and continents, really throughout human existence. But if we take a look at where we are right now, we have substance abuse, we have suicides, we have depression, we have medication, anxiety, addictions, we have, mass shootings, divorce rates, divided families. All of these things are at a record high, which means we need to step back and take a look at what's going on. These parenting tactics are not only outdated, but they're dysfunctional, and it can be detrimental to the generations of people who grew up in them. So right now, people in this mindful parenting community, like you and me and all of your listeners today, we are at the cutting edge of shifting away from these, what we call tragic coping mechanisms, towards a more empowered model of connection, empathy, and trust, like you mentioned in your intro there.
Yeah, well, I think what most parents don't realize, we always know, like, kids don't come with an instruction book, right? And we kind of think we should know how to do it, right? Because we can look at ourselves and say, well, I turned out great. So however I was parented, even
Yeah.
if it's dysfunctional in some regards, and say, well, that's what I'm going to do. And we parent the way we were parented.
Right.
We, do the work and read the books and explore the other options out there. And
Mhm.
and I think people, uh, they use, I don't even think they realize that they're using fear for compliance.
Right. Yeah, we'll
Right.
get into that a lot for sure. But that what you just mentioned, it makes me think, reading all the books and preparing yourself to be a parent, these are all kind of based on will, right? But when you are overtaxed and overburdened and your bucket is full and your patience is thin, those things aren't going to be at the forefront of the tools you're able to access. And that's when you're going to be falling back on those instincts. So, the way that stress and conflict are managed in your family are imprinted on your DNA for a minimum of 2 generations back, possibly longer. So, yeah,
Let's just stop there for a minute. Let's just absorb that for a minute,
yeah,
because that
2 generations
that's
at least.
crazy. And it's also,
Yeah.
it's the whole epigenetics thing. I mean, if I just recently read
Mhm.
that as because a woman is born with all of her eggs, right?
Right.
That
Mhm.
that and this is probably the two-generation theory, is that trauma also happened to, like, I was in my mother's eggs were
Mm.
in my mom when she was in her grandmother. Her I'm not putting this together right, but you know what I mean.
George's
So that's
grandmother. Yeah.
right. So that just, if you think about that alone, which
Right.
that's just sort of mind blowing. And so whatever traumas happen
Yeah.
to the grandmother
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
only carry down to the daughter, but the granddaughter as well.
Right. So it's not just the way that you were parented, but the way that your parents were parented by your grandparents. Right. And so if you're relying on instinct and kind of winging it in your parenting, you're accepting the fact that you're probably going to be parenting with the same tactics and patterns and coping mechanisms that your grandparents used. However, we're in a totally different world now. There's a different set of skills required for success and a different layer of consciousness available to you as an informed and conscious parent, as all of this science is continuing to come out. So right now you're able to make your own decisions about the qualities and values in parenting that you want for your children.
So was there a time that fear-based parenting was necessary?
I wouldn't say necessary, but I would say it was a given in historical times. You can imagine a family with 10, 12, 17 children needing to run the farm in order to have enough food for the family to survive. And so everyone, had a role and an expectation. And that was kind of a process that just had to keep going, had to keep turning to get everyone through for survival, right? But now we have a little bit more spaciousness, a little bit more choice, and a little bit more science explaining what these techniques do in the long term and an ability to make a different choice.
So what are some of the examples of the fears parents hold that influence their parenting?
Yeah. So, I mean, adults who've been raised by this fear driven parenting style, like we mentioned, they're perpetuating a generational cycle of nervous system dysregulation. And they're at high risk of using those tragic coping mechanisms, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So we need to, take a look at that and see what are some of the ways that this is showing up in your parenting. So, are you asking for the way that the parents use fear in their parenting, or the manifestations that it has?
The well, let's start with the manifestations, because I think what people don't realize, and you touched on, which is so important now, which the science is really making changes in parenting, and that's nervous system science and understanding that, and attachment science, right?
Right. Hmm.
That once you explore what's actually going on in your body when you have these fear-based responses, then you can begin to break it down and heal those fears.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, fear can show up in a lot of different ways in parenting. And like you just mentioned, it starts with the parent's own conditioned and often subconscious fears that they have internalized from their own childhood. And then that manifests into those tragic coping mechanisms. So, I'll give you some examples of that. That includes punishments, consequences, threats, bribes, yelling, shaming, timeout, name calling, hitting, pinching, spanking, swatting, sending to bed without food, enforcing isolation from the community or other family members, and comparison. And these are all those tragic coping mechanisms that are used to scare children into behaving in certain ways or not.
That was a long list. And especially probably
Yeah,
the
so
one,
breathe into that, and
yeah. And I'm the one that might trigger a lot of,
yeah, if you
as it did me.
felt,
I'm sorry, the one that triggered me the
which
most,
one?
timeouts, because, for
Timeout.
my generation,
Yeah.
yeah. So we're gonna take a pause here. We're gonna go to break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more
Okay.
about the whole timeout controversy, which most people think like, what's wrong with timeouts? I'd like
Yeah.
to talk about that. You're listening to the
Yeah.
Awakened Project.
Okay.
Susan Dolci, and we'll be right back. And she does a lot of work with the Waldorf schools. And today we're talking about fear-based parenting. But before we get into, definitely want to get into the whole timeout thing. Where can people find you?
Yeah, raisedcourageous.com, Raised Courageous on Instagram, Facebook, groups, Raised Courageous Parents. I'm all over social media. Thanks.
And she's also given us a really super generous offer. If you go to Transformation Talk Radio and you go to the Awakened Parent Project and the show description for this show, she is giving away an unlimited amount of her mini course within this calendar year, the 3-Minute Meltdown Miracle, with the coupon code APP 2021. And that link is in the show description. So what is the 3-Minute Miracle?
Yeah. So this is a 3-minute approach to working with your child who's in the midst of a meltdown or a tantrum or a blowout, any form of dysregulation, in a mindful and connected way. So you can actually work to minimize and prevent the likelihood of these intense blowouts happening down the road by the way you are showing up for them. So we go over that in detail. It's super quick and effective, and a great starting point if you're interested in jumping into the larger world of mindful parenting.
Yeah, self-regulation is the key. Self-regulation. So before the break, we were talking about, you gave us a laundry list of fear-based parenting tactics. Among them were, pinching, hitting, shaming, name calling. And then you crossed over into the timeout, which, I bristled, because when I was raising my kids in the 90s, like that was the accepted way to discipline a child, was to say, okay, you need to, you're acting up, and you go sit on the naughty stair or whatever people had, or the naughty chair, whatever they wanted to call it. And the whole point of it being that they get a break, you get a break from them. They have to, they have to contemplate. At 3-year-olds can't contemplate anything, what they did wrong. And so I read this book when my youngest was first born, and she was a baby. And it was The First 3 Years of White by Burton White. And at the time, it was recommended to me by my pediatrician. I thought, when I read it, I thought it was brilliant. Like, this was going to be my parenting Bible. And he has a technique in his book that many people have talked about. And I've just recently read on somebody's blog how effective they thought this technique was. And it's to separate you from the child. And so he even recommends doing this at the age of 18 months. Like, this is the first form of discipline. And the idea is to separate you from your child. And if even better, put a barrier between you and the child. So like a baby gate, but they have to be able to see you. I mean, think about this. Now, hold on. Like, when I think about this now, I just get sick to my stomach. They have to be able to see you, but the punishment is to be separated from you. They can't have access to you because they were hitting or biting or, throwing things or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I was like, this, nobody's getting hurt, putting a baby behind a gate. And so I did that. And she, and I would do it for like, so if she was 18 months old, I did it for not 18 minutes, but like, a minute and a half or whatever.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where if she was misbehaving and I said, do you want to go behind the gate? She would clean up her act really fast. No, I don't want to go behind the gate. So, and I thought, okay, this is how I'm teaching her right from wrong, right? Like the good behaviors and the bad behaviors. Well, fast forward to she's 5. She's 4 or 5 years old. We're on one side of the street, playing outside. And I had my youngest I was wearing her in a sling, and I had to get something from the other side of the street. Now there was a ton of kids on the one side of the street. And I said, Juliana, I said, stay there. I'm just going to run over and get something, like literally it was a small neighborhood suburban street. I cross over and I hear a car racing down the road, and I turn around and I see her, and I see this look of panic on her face. And I know, and I'm like, stay, don't cross the street, stay there. And total panic. And she bolted across the street. Luckily, the car came to a screeching halt and did not hit her, but it was close. And now I can look back and say that she didn't know those kids really well. I was her anchor over there. And the fact that I was only going across the street put her into a panic because I was separating myself from her. And she ran in front of a car.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So my point is, as I go on this verbose story, is that these techniques that seem innocent, that seem like we're just trying to teach these kids, acceptable behaviors or unacceptable behaviors, which is also another thing I know you can talk about. Like there is no like bad behavior. There's just unmet needs, right?
Yeah.
It's separation from their security.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. That's such a powerful example of that. And I love how you were able to tie it into what was going on with her as a baby, with your discipline of the baby, into, how it manifested in her later. And, she's older now. And so you could see that was going on for her when you ran across the street. But those same feelings of fear and needing you in a moment of dysregulation were present for her as an 18-month-old also. Right. So as we learn about attachment science right now, we realize that under 3 are entirely dependent on the parent for survival and co-regulation. And so when we are showing up as a perpetuator of fear, they're already having a hard time. And then we're showing up, making it worse by intentionally isolating ourselves or, yelling or shaming or hitting or whatever it is that we're doing to make it worse. We're creating a gap and distance and a problem in that parent-child relationship, which the attachment of the parent to the child is now seen to be the foundation of everything in their future as adults. If you read Dan Siegel's work, The Power of Showing Up, this is their social, emotional, cognitive, their job performance, grades, everything is based on that initial parent-child relationship. So that's one of the overarching goals of this, is to figure out how to have harmony and cooperation and connection versus showing up for your child in a way that alienates you from them and causes harm to the relationship between you two.
Well, and like we like to say at Jai, is history is not destiny.
Yeah.
So if you're listening right now and you're feeling overwhelmed by some of this information and maybe have regret or remorse, things can change. You can still change. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. I don't think it matters even with adult children. I still think it's always repairable, and just understanding that how our nervous systems interact with each other, even in any relationship, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, history is not destiny.
Yeah. And here's a practical tool you can use, if this is all sounding overwhelming right now, is Contrary to popular belief, parenting is and it can be about much more than just becoming an expert in behavior modification and control, which sounds like that book you referenced is a lot about getting them to stop certain behaviors. But there's actually much more going on below the surface of a behavior that sadly goes overlooked a lot by parents and teachers and the like. So, through the Jai Institute, we have this beautiful diagram called Root to Bloom that Susan or I could get for you, which shows a big, beautiful flower, and the child's behavior, whatever it may be, is the petals of that flower at the top. You could also think of an iceberg for this also, if that helps you. But then there's the base of the flower and the stem and the leaves and this elaborate root system. And these are all the child's underlying thoughts, feelings, needs, and beliefs. And how often do we stop to consider this when we're attempting to discipline or correct or stop a behavior or just to navigate a conflict that's going on? And so it's really beautiful, and it might be a simple visual or a practical tool you can use when you're looking at your child so dysregulated and wondering, what to do, how to get through the situation in a positive way. Children don't need to be made to feel bad to learn. In fact, shame, punishments, and consequences, all of those elements of fear-driven parenting, they do have, like I said, a negative impact on the child's long-term health and development down the road.
Yeah, I kind of touched on it, and and you were talking about it in the Root to Bloom process, is that what I don't think parents understand, and I know I didn't, is that, like we said, there are no really good or bad behaviors. All behaviors are just an unmet need. So when a child's having a meltdown, and especially a pre-verbal child, right? We're trying to figure out, what does that child need in that moment.
Yeah.
And if we stop looking at it as like, oh my God, my child's having a tantrum in the middle of the grocery store, because let's be honest, when that happens, it's because judgment on you, right? I'm a awful mother. Everybody's looking at me like, why can't you control your child? And that's not what's happening. That Don't worry about what people think of you. It's what's happening with your child. What does your child need in that moment?
Yeah. Their behavior is their best attempt for their developmental stage to get their needs met. And if your child is having a meltdown and an episode of dysregulation, you can imagine them on a life raft in a torrential sea storm. They don't know which way is up. So if you are using things like threats and scolding and consequences and yelling at the child, you're just adding fuel to the fire, right? Instead, you want to show up for your child in those chaotic and unpleasant moments, just like Susan said, as their safe harbor. And you can offer yourself as a way for them to return to safety and regulation through yourself being regulated, and offering this beautiful tool called co-regulation, which can guide them back to safety. So you want to be the anchor, not the wind for them.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy. I want to talk more about how people can learn to co-regulate, and how they can, because really, a lot of the work that we do, we're not trying to change the child's behavior. We're trying to get the parent to understand what their trigger is so that they can calm down. So we're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about co-regulation and self-regulation. I am speaking with Danielle Murphy Faris today. You're listening to the Awakened Parent Project, and we will be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Dolci. We are talking with Danielle Murphy Faris today. This is the Awakened Parent Project, and we're talking about fear-based parenting. And which has kind of been like the authoritarian sort of parenting style that has probably been the way to parent for generations and generations, and that's all everybody knew. But now we're in a new world, and there's a lot of resources. There's a lot more science. We were talking about nervous system science and attachment science. So nervous system science is really important to the work that you do, which is like what your 3-Minute Miracle is about. And so let's talk about what that really is, because I think people would hear, okay, self-regulation, co-regulation, like, what does that mean? Like, I don't even know what that means. Danny, tell me what the, I mean, I do, but I'm like, I could see people going, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
Right. Yeah. So when we are able to have awareness of what's going on in our autonomic nervous system and get in front of our triggers, so we know when we're headed towards a fight or flight response physiologically in our body, then we can bring this cognitive element, this mindful element, and then therefore purposeful choice into how we respond and engage with our child when we feel triggered. So this is about self-awareness about what's going on for you, finding and knowing and being able to access a way to return to inner calm and inner safety when you feel triggered by something. So it does take a lot of self-reflection and really getting to know, what is it for you? Do you feel calmed and soothed with maybe physical exercise? You need to do 10 push-ups, or maybe drinking some cold water, or maybe humming, maybe washing your hands, some kind of ritual where you're able to calm down and return to inner safety. From there, addressing your child and offering them this tool of co-regulation, where they are actually borrowing your nervous system in order for them to return to inner safety and calm in whatever's going on. And from there, exploring solutions together about how the situation could have been handled differently, or that's when you're going to add in those elements of talking and solving and working through the challenge, versus when one or both of you is in the heat of the moment and in a dysregulated nervous system state. Does that help?
Yeah. And I think what happens, it happens so fast, right?
Yes.
You can go from 0 to 60 in a blink of an eye. And I think one of the things that we just recently learned that was fascinating for me is that I have a need that's also not being met.
Mm-hmm.
So when a child's having a meltdown in the grocery store, my need that's not being met is I got to get in and out of this grocery store. I'm not feeling like my time is valid, or like any sort of things,
Yeah.
any laundry list of things of my needs that aren't being met, that are now creating, it's like we're both fighting to have our needs met at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
But we are the parent, we're the adult in the room, right?
Mhm.
So it's important to, when you feel that rise, that boiling point start to go up, to say, okay, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, and that's why I said with the whole, I used the grocery store thing because that was absolutely happened to me one time. And I was horrified because everybody, at least it feels like it, right? That everybody's looking at you.
Mm-hmm.
And, or, you've got a kid in the restaurant and they start screaming and throwing forks and food, and you're like, and you feel like the whole world has their eyes on you, right?
Yeah.
And what I think is not well understood, or maybe people think it's too like woo-hoo or whatever, but energy is energy.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's what you're trying to say, right? Is that we are exchanging, it's like, you've got two energies button heads over here, both
Mm-hmm.
with unmet needs. And our job is, if I hear you right, is to find something that soothes us,
Mm-hmm.
like the whole count to 10
Yeah.
situation,
Mm-hmm.
before we yell or shame or pinch or smack or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm on a tangent a little bit because I was in a client session, and I said to my client, she tends to go into freeze mode.
Okay.
And I said, you can still count to 10 even if you're in freeze mode,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I don't, people like who are avoidant, they're like, okay, I'm out. I'm just walking out this door. I'm taking my kid. But you can still, even if it's still you're still dysregulated, even if you're in freeze mode.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a couple things with that is, one, I would say when we are in the grocery store or the restaurant and we're feeling that, fight or flight trigger come on when our child is having a meltdown, that's an example of a chronic dysfunctional nervous system, because our nervous system is perceiving the 2-year-old crying on the floor the grocery store as danger. That's the nervous system's job, is to perceive everything in the world as safe or dangerous, safe or dangerous. So if you start to feel a rise in your thermometer, or which is another practical tool of how we gauge our nervous system dysregulation, a visual of a thermometer. But if you start to feel that rise coming on, you're getting anxious, you're getting worried, you're having needs that are being unmet, you're dysregulated. So that's where I would recommend, going back and doing that groundwork of understanding your childhood traumas and developing this coherent narrative of what was that like for you as a child? How were you met when you were having a tantrum in the grocery store by your parent? And did that cause you to internalize more fear? Because now, as an adult, your child is having a meltdown in the grocery store and you're having a physiological fear-based response. So that's the first thing that I would say, is going back to that. But then, once you get to the here and now, like you mentioned, accessing your own personal sensory calming tools, which might be, just counting to 10 or whatever you need to do to get some spaciousness and get a gap between the trigger and the response. Because if your child meltdowns and you react, that's a reaction, that's a instinct, that's what we talked about in the beginning, and that's not a mindful approach to how you want to address your child, what the overall goal of raising this child is, what values and beliefs you want to instill in this child as an adult. Those things are going out the window when you just react to a child based on a trigger. So everything we do in mindful parenting is about expanding that gap between what happens and our response.
And let's just talk a little bit too about what's developmentally appropriate.
Yeah. So we have a lot of great charts that Susan or I could give you about what is developmentally appropriate for each age and stage. But I want to give you a word of caution here with these charts, is that these are based on a nervous system state. So you could have a 12-year-old who has been a product of fear-based parenting, and they don't have the developmental nervous system state of a 12-year-old. It could still be a 3-year-old. So you do have to take that into consideration as you're looking at these charts and who should be able to do what at which age. It is a lot of individuality based on what the child has experienced in regards to safety and regulation and calm up until this point.
So what are some of the, and we're probably gonna have to bridge this over into the last segment, but so, okay, what do you do? What are some of the solutions?
Yeah.
Like,
This is a great question. And people say, how do you get kids to listen and behave if you're not using fear, right? And so I want to invite you now, maybe you can reflect on this during the break, is to take a second and pause. And if you're listening to this, I'm guessing that listening and behaving are not truly at the core of what kind of values you want to instill in your children as they get older. You might actually want to instill things in them like ethics or creativity or cooperation or independence or initiative or resiliency. And so a lot of the work that Susan and I do in our coaching is to help you identify and match where the values you want your children to have as adults are showing up in the day to day. And are those values being fostered in the way you hold your boundaries and the way that you enforce them? So that's the first part of it, is really understanding, is compliance my overall goal of parenting, or is there more to it than that? And when we can allow our children to feel seen, heard, have their feelings validated, and really let them know that they are genuinely an important and valued member of your family, then we can start to soothe that fear response in the brain, which floods the child's system, and allow them a chance for relaxation, allow them to soften into connection, cooperation, and collaboration. So that's really the first part, is understanding the nervous system, what's your role in it, and how it manifests.
yeah. And because I think there's a generation of, like, my generation of parenting that still was brought up to believe that we're either going to spoil a child,
Mhm.
or the child's going to become manipulative, and they're gonna work with us to get their way. She's wrapped around daddy's little finger, all of those things. And really, um that's really not the case. I mean, that's not what children, uh, they don't even know what manipulation is. They just have needs, and not, of course, we can't meet all of their needs all of the time, right? We can't let them eat, all the candy they want. We can't let them stay up all hours of the night. We have to, we're still the parent. We still have to provide a healthy, safe, wholesome environment for them to grow up. But um, I think all of those things, like you said, it takes a lot of reflection
Mm-hmm.
to understand how you were parented to begin the
Mm-hmm.
journey to not only parent your child, but to reparent yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that the child has all of those needs, but they also have that need for feeling interconnected into the family unit and the community, which goes back to your example from the beginning of using isolation as a discipline technique, because the child has this drive, instinctual drive to be connected and integrated into the group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to take our one last break. And when we come back, I want to talk about how we can set our children up for success in the future, because it's a whole new world, especially with screen time and online learning and social media and all those scary things. You're listening to the Awakened Parent Project. I'm talking with Danielle Murphy Faris today. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Dolci. Today I'm joined by Danielle Murphy Faris. She's a parent coach. She's also a student with the Jai Institute of Parenting. She's my parenting cohort in crime. And you can find Danielle at www.raisedcourageous.com. And today she is offering an unlimited amount of her 3-minute meltdown miracle. This calendar year, and you can get that link at the show description on Transformation Talk Radio. And I think anybody with small children wants to know how to stop the meltdown. So before break, we talked a little bit about values and boundaries.
Mhm.
And one of the things I was saying in the break is that what I learned, I mean, I knew about values and I knew boundaries, but I never really understood how boundaries are the offspring of our values. And that if I were to do it all over again with my young children, I would probably sit down with my husband and say, we kind of need like a family mission statement. Like, what are our values? Why, what do we want our children to succeed in? What's important to us? I know for me, service is a really big thing. It is for him too, but we never really sat down and did that. And I think that would be an invaluable exercise for young families to do as we are about to talk about setting our children up for success, because it just makes it clear.
Right. Yeah, so often parents maybe have rules or expectations or boundaries, but they don't really know why they have that. And so that's where I can get into a gray area and a lot of butting heads with the child, because the child is, pushing that boundary and the parent maybe doesn't have that clarity and confidence in the associated value with why they're holding that boundary. So again, it does come back to looking at your personal values that you hold for yourself and for your children and for your family and for that parent to child relationship, and then seeing where that shows up in the way you parent and the choices that you make in regards to parenting. So
Yeah.
you know,
It's not
people
that just because that's what I did. I mean, that's
yeah.
like, I had this silly rule. It wasn't super silly, but I have 3 daughters, and whenever they wanted to get their ears pierced, I said, well, you have to be 9. And they were like, why? I'm like, because I was 9 when I
Yeah.
got my ears pierced. Like, there was no reason. There was no good reason. And my youngest wore like those clip-on ones, which were popular for a long time, to the point where her ears were raw. And I was like, well, this is ridiculous. Why do I have this 9-year-old rule? Like, if she's going to, but it's true. It's just like, because that's what happened to us, or like how we were raised, or Yeah.
Yeah, so just taking a look at those and seeing which ones have flexibility to evolve and which ones don't and why. And really knowing that for yourself is going to help you show up confidently and with nervous system state safety when you hold a boundary for your child, because this is my value of help or service
Mhm.
or friendliness. And so I'm not wavering on that versus, oh, she's pestering me to get my ears pierced. Why do I have this? I don't know. It's causing a rise in me, because you don't know why you have that. So that's a great exercise for sure.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, not to steer anybody wrong, when we're talking about empowered parenting and conscious parenting, we're not saying that you don't say no.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you say yes to everything that the child asks for, and that's what boundaries are for. And then there is still a, no, we don't do this. This
hmm
is not, like you said, this is a boundary in our family. This is a value. This is why we do this. And it doesn't mean you're still not going to get pushback from the kid, right?
Yeah, but when you can present it in that way with, empathy and love and valuing the relationship at the forefront of that no, it is going to be much more well received and understood in the long run of, where you're coming from and the choices that you're making for your child.
So this is kind of off script, but I'm just curious, if you have, just because I get this question a lot,
Yeah.
um, what do you have any recommendations for how to monitor screen time, or how to best
Yeah.
use screen time? Because I know, again, some people will use that as a punishment, like,
hmm
okay, you just lost, you lost an hour screen time.
hmm
And I mean, we're just coming off the pandemic, so many kids, like, it was their entire life, like, do you have any advice?
Yeah. Yeah. So getting clear for yourself about what the screen time boundary and limit and rule is from day to day is going to be the first step. So it's not like, oh, they push me enough, then I'll give them 5 more minutes or I'll give them another hour or this or that. And not correlating their behavior, good or bad, quote unquote, with the screen time, but really just having it be set and clear and understanding why. Is it for eye health? Is it for brain health? Is it because you value time in nature? Is it because, whatever it is, why are you holding these screen time values are going to help you hold that boundary more confidently, but then also setting up a plan for exiting screen time. So
Mm,
children, when they are looking at screens, are having a different physiological response than adults. They're being put in a fight or flight state. So those are the same hormones that are released into their bloodstream as if they're being chased by a tiger, right? So when they come off of the screen time, have something set up for them to release those hormones and get that fight or flight energy out of their system is going to make a smoother transition for the family overall.
yeah, that's really valuable advice. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So do you have any final thoughts? Any yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, just kind of like I said, when our children feel seen and heard by us, when they feel understood and not judged, and they aren't being controlled by fear, then their brains can grow.
Mm,
So, feeling seen is a prerequisite to feeling safe. When we feel safe, we develop, integrate, grow, and thrive. And it's the same for them. So, what Susan and I do in our coaching practice is this empowered parenting model that's about becoming informed and aware of this stuff like you're doing right now, and having that self-reflection piece, and then being committed to showing up in presence and authenticity with your child, validating their feelings, and again prioritizing that relationship as the foundation
yeah.
of your parenting.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Danielle. This has
Thank
been
you.
wonderful.
This
This
is
has been great.
yeah.
Again, her website is raisedcourageous.com, and she has her 3-minute miracle meltdown. Did I get that? 3-minute meltdown miracle. I did it backwards.
Yeah.
And that link is in the show description with code APP2021. So thank you, Danielle.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
So much about being a parent is about self-love, self-care, and self-compassion. You can't give to your family from an empty cup. Putting yourself last doesn't make you a good mom. It just makes you a tired mom. If you head over to my website, susandolci.com, you'll see 3 circles in the middle. There's some freebies over there, but if you click on the third circle, you can download your Journey to Self-Love workbook. It's a 30-page self-guided study that asks the questions to help you discover what's working and maybe what's not working in your life right now. And it's only $5, so I hope you go check it out. And this is the crux of it. I want you to remember, parenting is not about perfection. You're human, that's impossible. But conscious parenting is about allowing your children to be your awakening. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for being a part of the Awakened Parent Project. My goal with this show is to help us all become more compassionate and engaged parents by diving into the many techniques and ideologies of the conscious parenting community. This is a safe space to embark on a practical and spiritual journey of self-exploration and expand our ideas about conscious parenting. Got thoughts, questions, ideas? I want to hear from you. Reach out to me if there's a topic you'd like to hear covered on the show, or to share your conscious parenting story by visiting susandolci.com.